Hello everyone. So this is a video that I wanted to make to show some of the stuff that's been happening with HaxeUI. More importantly, what I wanted to really show is how the workflow is and how I personally use the workflow. So without further ado, we're just going to jump into it. So we've got a blank folder. Now the first thing that we can do is we can open up a command prompt and use the haxeui tool, which comes part of the haxelib. It's essentially a run command that lives inside the haxelib haxeui core. You can also add an alias to it, which I've currently done. So I've just got haxeui, and you can go create, and then let's say HTML5. So this is the HTML5 backend. I use Flash Develop, so we can also create project files for Flash Develop. You don't have to if you don't have the Flash Develop. Then it will just create the HXML file for you, and this goes for all of the other backends as well. Some of them are a little bit more involved. The HTML5 one is obviously one of the more simple ones. So we've got our HTML5 project. Like I say, I use Flash Develop. The template itself is very, very straightforward. It's just a button that has a click handler on it. I'll show you just now. So this is our application, quote unquote. Like I say, very, very straightforward. A big button that when you click it says thanks. It just shows how the basic way that it works. The main is also very, very straightforward. So what this is all it is just loads that XML file and starts up the app, which in the case of HTML5 isn't massively important, but in other ones like haxeui-hxwidgets, this is quite important because you need to start up the event loop and such. So for the HTML5 one, very straightforward. We've now outputted our index.html5. We can execute that, and it's gone onto another screen, bear with me. And we've got our application. Nothing particularly impressive there. However, we've created our project files, we've compiled it, and we've got our output, and this is all using DOMs and that sort of stuff. So now we can do exactly the same thing. This time we want to create one for haxeui-hxwidgets, and again I'm using Flash Develop. Don't have to. You can just use without the Flash Develop command line option, and it will simply create the HXML file for you. So we've got that. And what we should have now is we should have another haxeui-hxwidgets project, which we do. So we'll open that one also. Now this is using haxeui-hxwidgets and by proxy using haxeui-hxwidgets, which is the Haxe externs for it. So we'll start compiling that. This should be relatively fast to compile simply because we're using the compiler cache. So it shouldn't be too bad. Yeah, for example, yeah, it's got all of the object files already. So that's done, we'll run that. And this is the same application, nothing's changed here. This is exactly the same application that was made previously. If I made an edit here, then obviously it will run exactly the same on the HTML5 one. So there you go, so that's again, very, very straightforward. This is of course a native application though now. This is obviously not running in the web browser, this is a purely 100% native application. It would also run the same as this on OS X, again natively, and the Linux distributions, and again natively it would look like the operating system because it's using, under the hood, it's using haxeui-hxwidgets. So we're happy with that, let's say. Now the other one, and again these are all very, very different backends. I could show you all of the backends potentially, but the composite ones, which is like HTML5, is relatively similar to OpenFL, similar to car, that sort of stuff. The native one, haxeui-hxwidgets, is obviously a little bit, well, quite different from the visual perspective. And then, of course, one that's extremely different is the Android one. So again, I'm using the tool. This will create the Gradle project and all of the bits and pieces that go with that. Again, I'm using a Flash Develop file. You don't have to. You could just omit that, and it will create the HXML file for you. So now, as usual, we should have a Android project now. This one will take a little bit longer. The build is a little bit more involved. I've tried using the Gradle cache, and it does work. It's just, it doesn't shave that much time off of it. So let's just run that. Now I'm trying to use the emulator here. Normally I use my actual phone, but I'm using the emulator because, of course, you wouldn't be able to see my phone on the screen. So hopefully this will all work as it should. The whole build process will build it. And should push it down to the emulator or the device, whichever is connected first. So basically the connection to your emulator or device, and then run it on the device, including starting up logcat, so you can see what the application outputs. just a few more minutes. Then after this, what we're going to do is I just want to show you some of the other, some of the controls, basically. We're not going to write a compelling application at all. It's not going to be interesting. It's simply just to add some more controls into the markup, into the XML, and run them on the different platforms, the different backends, which ultimately lead to different platforms, to see how they work together and see how they look differently and act differently. So the second build after this should be a lot faster as well. Okay, so I don't know what happened there. It's saying it can't find the specified file. Okay, well I can see what's happening here. So what's happened, I was changing some of the command line stuff, and I've obviously messed up with the templates. So really what should have happened is that should have been copied in here. It will be after this, obviously. And I believe, yeah, Android home, this should all be fine. Okay, so let's try that again. So yeah, I was messing with the command line tool and moving some stuff around, and obviously it's not creating the batch file where it should have created it, but that's fine. We can just copy it out for now. Okay, so this has installed it, and now it's run it. So we've got our application. Again, nothing particularly interesting, but the point is it's exactly the same application. This is the same application completely as we've previously done. And the perfect way to prove that, I mean, if you wanted to, was we'll make an edit here, compile that, run that, and run that. We haven't made any edits. Here, there you go, we've got our new application. This has also been updated. And again, this one will take a little bit longer, but this should have the new one also. And there we go, we've got our new one. So that's all fine. That's your basic application, your project creation, and the way that haxeui can sort of seamlessly switch between backends with absolutely no effort really from the user's perspective. Once you have your project files up, once you have your build system, well, not even your build system, once you have the files around, everything will just work, and you can just start actually working on the application rather than working on getting all the different things to work across the different platforms. So now I'm just gonna stop that edit, put that back to how it was. So now I'm gonna add some more controls. So obviously the easiest ones, and I'm actually gonna work on the HTML5 backend for fun. So text, I normally work on the HTML5 backend simply because it's quicker to prototype, it's very easy to work out if things are broken and stuff like that without having to send it all the way down to the Android device. Or even the haxeui-hxwidgets build sometimes can take a little bit longer than just the JS build, which is lightning fast. So we'll just call this label. What else do we want? Let's say we want a checkbox. We'll give that some text as well. In fact, actually, let's put these in an hbox just to make them look nice. So this is a horizontal box. And we'll put a few of these in there. Let's say 3. We also want some options as well, why not? So we'll say option 1. And we'll have these as option boxes. What else do we want? Let's have a text field, probably a good idea. Text field, which is just your way of inputting text. Trying to think what else there might be. So text field is fine. We can have an image in there as well, why not? We'll give that a resource. haxeui comes with some resources. This probably will get removed at some point. But these are just good for testing. I know that they're there. What else do we want? We can probably have a switch in there. So a switch, Now I've called this switch 2. The reason this is switch 2 is because currently it's going through a refactor. So there's an old switch and there's a new switch. The new switch is switch 2, the old switch obviously is switch 1. Eventually switch 2 will become switch 1, but I don't want to delete that code yet, as sometimes I'm using it for reference and making sure that I'm not removing functionality. So we've essentially got two versions of the switch, one which is defunct, which is switch, again in the branch, in the new component method branch, and the other one, switch 2, which is going to be the main switch at some point. We can also have a progress bar. Let's give it a pos of 50, let's say. And why not, let's have a slider as well with a pos of 50. Okay, so there's a relatively decent amount of different types of components. I think I've used all the correct ones in regards to the switch 1, switch 2. I'm pretty sure that's correct. Well, we can find out now. Okay, so there's our, obviously completely rubbish UI. We've got our switch components, we've got our sliders, we've got checkboxes, option boxes, and all the stuff that you could use to start to build an application. Of course, there's other stuff as well. There's tabs, and which I might show you later. There's tabs and scroll views and all kinds of stuff. But this is a a relatively decent component set. We'll run that on haxeui-hxwidgets, see what that looks like. Switch 2 on haxeui-hxwidgets, the counterpart that I've got is a toggle button, which is quite ugly, but it's the best one I can think of at the time. It might change later, who knows. But there you go, there's our application. So this is purely 100% native. We've got our option boxes, we've got our sliders again. This is the switch as far as I've created it at the moment. We might have a custom component at some point and another way of doing it, but for now it's just a toggle button. And we've got our checkboxes, and everything is essentially as it should be. The Android one will be very, very similar, certainly. So again, we'll run that. This will take a tiny little bit longer, simply because the build is a little bit more involved. And then we have it. We have our purely 100% native. So these are all native components now. This is exactly Android components. And it should all work pretty much the same. But some styles work, some others don't. So for example, we can go here, we can go style, color equals red. We could also probably make background so they're selective generally, which is generally the case for the native backends specifically. Everything is pretty stylable, and especially in composite app backends, everything is completely stylable. With the native ones, they're a bit more selective. It depends what the framework, the host framework, will allow you to do. In this case, this should work. There you go. So we've got a green button and a red label. haxeui-hxwidgets should be similar. Not exactly the same. Again, you'll have a Windows border around the button, like this, for example. But the general idea is there. It styles what it can. So let's just go back to something a little bit more native. Okay, so the other thing that we can do is, if we wanted to, we could, let's say we wanted to make this take up the whole viewport. So we just make it width equals 100, and we want the height to be equal 100. So this will basically take up the entire size. Then let's say we wanted a tab view. Again, tab view 2 is the new one. The old one is tab view, but eventually that will become the new one. So we've got that. We want our, let's say we have, let's make it a VBox. So page 1. Yep. And let's give it a couple more pages just to make it look good. Okay. So we want, we've got this to be 100%, so the tab view itself will take the entire viewport up. We want the tab view itself to take up the entire viewport, and we want the pages, this page at least, to take up the entire viewport. We don't need it at the moment yet, to be fair, but I'm going to do it because I want to show something else as well. So first of all, let's just whack that in there, and this should work. Okay, so now we've got our exactly the same application, if you want to call it that, but now we're in a nice little tab view, so that's okay. We've taken up the entire viewport, so it's a full-blown application, so we can do things like that. The next thing I'll show you, obviously, as you see this, it doesn't scroll, so you're kind of a little bit out of, it's not great here. I'll show you it a little bit more in a better way in a minute, but okay, so here's our HTML5 backend. This should be exactly the same. And there you go. So we've got, obviously it's a bit bigger here, but that's because it's the entire viewport. And again, we've got, this is, all of our pages, everything else is exactly the same. So that's fine. And then our Android backend. And this will look native, but the same concept will apply. Okay, so there's our application. These are obviously native tabs, and everything is exactly the same inside there as you'd expect. Now, one of the things that I can show you, which is quite, well, interesting, I suppose, is if, let's say, we wanted to make this scroll. So I just want to go, let's multiply this by 10. So basically what happens is when we click this button, the height of this button is going to be 10 times the size it is originally. Now, you'll see what this means. If I go to the haxeui-hxwidgets version, which is the native Windows or native desktop, let's say. So we've got the same application. We'll build it, and you'll notice an issue. So, now this didn't scroll, which is an issue. That's a problem. And of course, exactly the same thing will happen on the phone. Not massive issue. Will be the same issue applies, of course, with HTML5, but it's not such an issue simply because we've got a huge viewport. But if it was 20 times the size, the same issue would apply. We'd need a scroll bar to show that. So let's see how we're just quickly if we're going down here. So it hasn't done it yet, I don't think. So this has not broken, but it's out of view. All the stuff that we want to see is out of view. So what we can do here, this is a relatively nice, simple solution here, is we can wrap the whole thing up in a scroll view. Again, the scroll view is scroll view 2 because there's it's currently being refactored. Now here's something a little bit different, obviously. So we want the scroll view to be the size of the page, essentially. Sorry, that's the wrong way around. Sorry, let's start that again. So we want the page here, so that's the page of the tab. We want to wrap all of this in a scroll view. Width equals 100%, height equals 100%. We might need another V-box in here, I'm not sure. I'm going to add it anyway, just in case. But I think we probably could get away without it, but just to make sure, I'm going to add another V-box here. So this could also be an H-box, it could be a grid, it could be a number of other things, which would, we don't want the height. So this is the thing, we don't want the height, we want the V-box to grow, and that will actually make the scroll view scroll, of course. But it could be, it doesn't have to be a V-box, it could be an H-box, a horizontal box, it could be a grid, it could be any number of things. So just see if I've messed up the XML, I don't think I have. Well, let's try it on this one. So this is our Windows application, this is our Windows. So now when I click the main button, or the only button, it should increase its size by 10, and automatically the scroll view should then scroll, basically meaning that the application can still be used as you would expect it to be. So we click that, and bam, we've got our scroll bar. So that's all great. Everything else remains the same, and of course if you could reset it, then the scroll bar would disappear. It also works, of course, if you maximize it, then it will disappear. That's all fine. So this is nice. That's our native version. Again, on our, you have to build it first, of course. On our HTML5 version, it's not a huge issue, but we can make it be an issue. And that's so we'll refresh that, we'll make it bigger, and our scroll bar is all here, so that's great. There is an issue with the scroll bar at the moment, and again, this is only for the composite, is it doesn't actually set the clipping rect, but the old one works, and it's just a small bug that I introduced somehow. But it will work, certainly. But apart from that, everything else is the same. And of course, our Android version is here. We'll build that. And again, this is the same application. This is just literally a different build for the same set. And you don't have to do this. This could be done in code as well. In fact, all the XML is doing, there's a macro basically that's going behind, and it's turning that into a set of component.add, component.add. And so here's our new application. And now we can scroll. So it's a full application now. It looks like and feels like a real application. It's scrollable if it needs to. And it's all there. This also should respond to size changes. So yeah, that's all fine. And I think I moved it the wrong way. Yeah. And that's about it. So yeah, like I say, all I really wanted to show you, it's not a compelling application, it's not exhaustive of the component list, and it wasn't supposed to be either of those things. It's simply to show how quickly it is to set up a haxeui application from XML. I'm using it from XML, you don't have to, and get it to run on 3 very, very distinct platforms for the web, for native desktop, and also native Android. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward and pretty productive, I think. So yeah, cheers, thanks very much.